Welcome everyone. Let's get this webinar started. We've got a lot to cover in an hour, so thank you for joining us today, wherever you may be across the globe. I'm Jeff Wilson, Senior Business Development Manager at NSF International, with a particular focus on textile industry preferred material standards and certification. And it's really my pleasure today to be moderating our webinar on technology drivers to improve the industry traceability system. And certainly we hope you find it informative and useful to you personally and to your organization as well. So a few admin items to go over before we get started. As always, all attendees will be muted throughout the webinar. We will have some time at the end for Q&A, so type your questions in the chat box as we go along. And finally, the webinar is being recorded, so we'll be getting it out to all of you shortly after. And please feel free to distribute to your colleagues, to your network, spread it far and wide. We appreciate that. Thank you. Many of you may not be familiar with NSF, as we are relatively new to the textile services market, but we're hardly newbies to testing, inspection, and certification. We've been in the industry for about 75 years, the large global footprint, largely in the food and water industries, but we're also active in health sciences, ISO registrations, and dietary supplements. But specifically for the textile industry, we cover a range of textile exchange standards that you can see here, as well as our own traceable down standard. In addition, we offer a host of sustainability consulting services ranging from various reporting frameworks, one of which you see there, CDP reporting, along with GRI and science-based targets, but also to strategy development and regenerative organic or agricultural consulting services, among others. Very, very pleased today to have our panelists with us, and thank you to all of you joining us. We've assembled a very experienced and diverse group of panelists to school us all about the various technologies that we'll be discussing in this next hour. But before I introduce them, I really want to briefly set the background and context for the topic that we're going to be discussing with each of our panelists. So this is the second in a three-part series of webinars we're doing that's really a kind of an outcrop of COVID, with the idea of inspiring and encouraging everyone in the industry to continue the good and the important work that standards and certification contribute to many of the sustainability goals that we have as an industry and at our companies. And like with so many things COVID related, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. In this particular moment, we feel it's important really to not only respect and recognize the value of the system, but also understand, like everything else, how we can improve the system to make it more efficient, lower risk, higher assurance, better data, and generally just more adoptable for stakeholders in the system to help achieve the objectives. So as with anything these days, as you all know, technology is often a key driver of change and improvement, and to some extent disruption. And that's the key point of this webinar: is what new and emerging technologies are out there being deployed now? How do they work? And more importantly, how can we think about integrating them together, marrying them into that transformed traceability and transparency system? So with that background and framework, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists, starting with Kieran Kelly, who is a managing partner with gen-sys based in the United Kingdom. Then MeiLin Wan, who leads the textile services work at Applied DNA Sciences in New York. And many of you may know MeiLin already from her extensive work in the industry. And then lastly, to Wendy Branson, who's manager of service operations at MDA, a satellite imagery and geospatial services provider based in Canada. So welcome, panelists, and thank you so much. I'd like to give a few minutes to each panelist to introduce themselves and what they do. So Kieran, why don't you kick it off? Then MeiLin, you can take it from there, and Wendy, we'll wrap it up with you. And again, you guys, we talked, if you can just keep it to a couple of minutes and we can get to the meat of the discussion. So Kieran, over to you. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you very much, Jeff. And thank you very much for the opportunity to support you and the team in your vision, and to join and support MeiLin and Wendy as well. So my name is Kieran Kelly. I work in the technology space for digital transformation. I have a history of deploying a number of world firsts across the blockchain sector, both in supply chain, food, and in beverage. And I'm delighted to join a very eclectic panel today of specialists to help support not only the digital aspect of this, but how we can use the technology, people, and process to help actually create new economic benefits and support the needs and demands of the sector. So thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you, Kieran. Yep. MeiLin.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Thanks to NSF for organizing this important webinar. My name is MeiLin Wan. I'm the Vice President for Textiles. I oversee the Certainty platform for our textile division, where we are able to tag, test, and track materials from the raw material to all the way to finished goods. So we're very excited about this discussion because it comes at a very important time, especially with a lot of issues related to Xinjiang and other concerns.
Thank you, MeiLin. Pleasure to have you. Wendy. Hello, Wendy, you may be muted.
There we go, sorry. So thank you again. I'm Wendy Branson. I've been working with MDA for over 30 years now, and MDA is very much an aerospace satellite robotics company that's in Canada. Much of what we do is using remote sensing products to generate information that can feed into such things as traceability, validation of different activities. So we're probably a little different than some of the other panelists which are here, but I think this is a great opportunity to see how things can link together in the textile domain.
Terrific. Thanks, Wendy and MeiLin and Kieran. So yeah, let's jump into the meat of the discussion then. So first question out of the gate is all of you, sort of a free for all, so go for it. Please, chime in as necessary. So a brief summary of where you see the systems today across multiple sectors, and so many sectors like textiles are grappling with this, from food to coffee, palm oil, etc. So what is lacking in the existing system of traceability, transparency, assurance, and what can be improved with the technology solutions that we're looking at, yours and others? And kind of high level, what do you see ahead? What are the opportunities? So fire away.
Fire away.
Yeah.
I think the one thing is there's so much technology that's out there now, and it's just increasing day in, day out, from sensors, which are from satellites, where you can gather information, down to drones, GoPros, all of this. So there's so much data that's out there that can be used to create information specifically for various industries. And I think one of the goals, or one of the things that I think we all want to drive for, is how you integrate it all together. You're providing information that then can support the various validation and sustainability practices. So to me, that's something that's exciting and something that I think is a goal to move towards.
And I would reiterate what Wendy said, that the information that is out there can help substantiate your claims for products. We think that's very important direction for all materials, whether it be cotton, recycled polyester, leather, down, feather, a lot of textile materials. But it's also not just information, but it's the right information, and the information that will actually relate to your supply chain for your products, and ultimately protect your brand. So, I think a lot of systems today are very focused on paper trails and, what's good enough the box and where we need to be because there's so much uncertainty in the world relative to forced labor, relative to are these materials really post-consumer recycled, that those paper trails now are not good enough. And you need to have meaningful scientific data to support your claims. So I feel that having a system in place where you can say we actually did verify the product that we said that we were making will be a huge milestone for textile industry.
Yeah, I mean, MeiLin, you and Kieran, just a second, but yeah, just to the extent of sort of the opportunities for improvement in the existing system. I mean, you used the word paper trail there a number of times, and that's so true. So there's this paper trail, but it can also be digital, but it's also sort of siloed in my estimation. So Kieran, maybe you can speak a little bit to maybe some of the failings, if you will, of the existing paper trail, silo, digitized system to what we see, you see ahead. Thanks.
I concur with what Wendy and MeiLin have shared, Jeff. And I think if one thing that 2020 and COVID has taught us is that the challenges are now in restrictions to innovate and to use this as a time to reflect on the system and where it's broken and it's fractured. As you have said, Jeff, data does reside in silos, and paper custody is extremely challenging, both in human error, in administration, and in terms of risk. And speaking earlier on, I believe the opportunity is very rife to take those key learnings and to abstract from data silos to work as a collective and a community. Data validation is vital, and whilst we talk about technology as an enabler, without validated data, any enablement will fail. So taking into account the economic benefits of sharing data and using artificial intelligence, using blockchain where it's used in its right case, has the opportunity to transform that industry, Jeff. Take data out of silos and increase not only the value of the data, but to have benefits way beyond just automation, regulation, real-time access, validation of data, but to actually go back to the grassroots and unlock value for the entire chain from point of creation through to point either of consumption or purchase.
Terrific. Thank you, Kieran. And that's a good segue over to you specifically. So, Kieran, you've been actively involved in blockchain and through our discussions, artificial intelligence applications associated with it. So, you've been involved in a number of years across multiple industries. But I think my observation is that it's kind of yet to really kind of gain traction. You've got a thing over here like with Walmart, or we hear about Azure and your project with NSF and different ones we've seen in the textile industry. But my sense of it is that we haven't reached that sort of capture moment. So what has been your experience, and what are the prospects, and what needs to be solved with blockchain to get it to scale, to get it to greater applicability and adoption?
I think that's a great question, Jeff. I think the term blockchain has been overused, and it has been stretched to fit into scenarios where it doesn't actually play a role or add benefit. As we know, just like the internet, there will be no single source, or there will be no single blockchain. There are multiple entrants into the marketplace, and the more we embrace that and realize that, I think it's also an educational piece. So as a distributed ledger, where it adds benefit is to support the trust economy. And data that's entered onto the chain, like anything else, if the data is not validated, then it's just going to become a nonsense machine which is no better than what's there today. When we think of what MeiLin was discussing earlier, which is about using a data validation, and Wendy was using it in terms of ontology, about how we can actually validate that declarations are being made in this area, and it's validated by either DNA or molecular architecture and geospatial. All of those data validation points go a long way to actually using the distributed ledger to support the trust economy, but also to create positive economic change from the ground up, Jeff. And once you validate that data, it's about unlocking that, sharing that value up and down the chain, but also removing risk. And in this day and age, there are so many, I suppose, poor actors that have utilized the word blockchain as the panacea. This will change everything. Fit a blockchain and it will revolutionize your business. That's okay, but you asked the question, what needs to be done? I think it's time for education in the marketplace, Jeff, and there are a number of global blockchains that are adding huge benefit, not only to the brands, to the sector, but also to the individuals working from the ground up. And whilst you see a number of companies promoting the use of this, blockchain by itself is not the answer. And I have to say, Jeff, you had fantastic foresight when you brought Wendy and MeiLin to the panel, because their data validation, along with this distributed ledger, creates a trust in an ecosystem that presents value beyond anything that we can imagine, removes the risk and services the needs. So whilst we believe what we have here today between our collective powers, the four of us, we're answering the questions the future is asking. And if one thing COVID has given us the opportunity to do, it's actually prove the point that those questions can be answered and we can create benefit.
Yeah, that's great, Kieran. Thank you. Super helpful, better understanding blockchain. So we'll get a little bit more back to you later, but MeiLin, want to direct this to you, and it's essentially the same question, but based on forensic tracers. And I know you and your organization, ADNAS, are really specific to DNA, but we know there's others out there relative to chemical and nano and mineral tracers, et cetera, et cetera. But again, my sense of it is not yet to scale, probably some obstacles to implementation, roadblocks. Sort of tell us what your experience is and how you see DNA and forensic tracers ahead, the prospects and possibilities.
Yeah, I think all of those things are important considerations, and there are different solutions out there, but it really comes down to the key basic questions is that, do you know that it is your product? Do you know that that product is fully in your supply chain and it relates to the brand or the customers that you're servicing? So that's kind of the intention of where we start from. There are other systems, but again, on their own, they don't provide the full picture. And ultimately, where we want to get to is, if you are concerned about knowing where your products come from, where they're going, you need to have multiple data points. So it is consistent with what Kieran is saying, that in order to prove provenance of, for example, cotton from a certain region, you don't just want to know, oh, it came from, Arkansas. You want to know it came from that gin that was in Arkansas, and that it went to this spinner. This spinner then verified the material, and then it got woven into a fabric and then made into finished product. And all of those touch points have verification for each of those parties in the supply chain. If you do all of those things and all of those data points, all those tests that are done on the material itself go into a secure database or blockchain, then you have full traceability, and then you have full data integrity of the material itself. So that is sort of the leap that has not happened, is why I have said right up front that I think that paper trail systems are still needed, but they don't go far enough, because at the end of the day, even if you audit once or twice a year, that doesn't really tell you in production that in fact that material that you say is 100% cotton from this region actually stays that way to the finished product. So I think the way we see forensic traceability in general is that the supply chain will take more responsibility, hopefully. And in order to do that, they need the tools. They need to know that, for example, they can do a test on their own. So DNA technology, we feel we're going to enable the supply chain to do exactly that. We will provide them the tools that will allow them to test the product and track it once they've tested it. So that's really the core of it. It's really not rocket science. It's really just providing the tools.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, great. Thanks, MeiLin. Obviously, we'll have some more to talk about here shortly. And Wendy, very fascinating. The work that you guys are doing and have been doing for many years in terms of geospatial satellite imagery. So these remote sensing applications, we'll call them that, drones, robots, in-ground sensors, even things like FaceTime, GoPro, all those kinds of things, Google Glass, are really pretty new and emerging, at least for the textile industry. So what are you seeing more specifically for prospects and challenges as you guys have deployed your imagery, your geospatial satellite imagery solutions in the paper, pulp, and palm oil industry? Thank you, Wendy.
Okay, thanks. Good. I'm not on mute. That's good. Yes. So we've actually been doing some very interesting work with some different pulp and paper industries, and I think one of the reasons we've succeeded is the ability to actually work with the industry, understand what they need, and how that fits into their sustainability requirements. So much of the work is actually more on the deforestation, the conservation, sustainability area. Now, the nice thing with the satellites that we can use, Google did a great job of creating everyone knowing about satellites and about remote sensing, just because you can go look at a map and say, oh, wow, I can't believe someone can see all of that. So that kind of gives you a feeling of impartiality, that anyone can actually look at this information. Being able to provide information products that can then feed into that sustainability loop, I think is something that's very, very important. As well, that importance is very industry specific. So every client probably has their own notion of how they want that to feed in. And then that can work its way back into a blockchain or any other kind of thing from a validation perspective. I think the industries that we're working with, we're feeding them a source of information. Basically, we call them forest alerts, where we're saying this area has been deforested, go check it out. Or we're saying, actually, this area has had a change since the last time we looked, whether it's really deforestation or wind blown down areas or whatever. It allows them to then go in and check it out using drones, using the communities that are there, other different types of perspectives, so they can do a validation of what this satellite, which is 800 kilometers up in the sky, is actually looking at. So it's taking that remotely sensed data into some kind of actionable information that allows a validation. So that's kind of what we're doing. And I think the prospects is that there's so much information, so much data out there, and it's just trying to combine the right sources to what you're actually trying to achieve.
All right, thanks, Wendy. Kieran, I'm going to head back to you on this. So I want to dive a little bit deeper specifically into the blockchain project that you've been working on with us at NSF regarding UK beef, what it is, how it works, and then kind of to the extent you can is include how the AI, artificial intelligence, works into that. So
sure. Again, Jeff, I'm overwhelmed. I think our common language here is community. It's not an industry. When Wendy, MeiLin, yourself, and ourselves see the value of this, we are a community. We're just a global community. And when you take a look at the UK beef industry, we looked at 3 key factors in this: a compelling need, a compelling event, and a willingness to change. So Wendy said you really do have to get down, and if you'll please pardon my pun, you have to get down into the fabric of a supply chain to understand how it works. It's not something that you can do from afar. So understanding the compelling event for the UK economy was obviously leaving the European Union. The compelling need was if they continued to go along the path of paper-based documentation and traceability, then their European counterparts, they would affect trade deals. It would impact the economy. It would impact currently the 100,000 jobs that we have in our local region here in Northern Ireland. And the willingness to change, which was the greatest of all, because these are folk that have built up their businesses from generation to generation to generation. So we looked at those 3 key factors. So once you identify the actors and the assets, our objective was to use, as MeiLin put it, digital markers, using multi-factor authentication, using GeoSpatial and satellite information linked to land registry. So whenever an animal is registered, it gets an electronic ear tag. The DNA is captured and it goes off to a third-party lab for validation. And the business, which then becomes a trusted trader, is linked to its geospatial information. So whenever an operator in that space makes a declaration either to government or to an export agency or to a processor or a retailer, that declaration we can confirm 100% that it was made in that time, in that space, and with this asset. And the fact is, we're seeing cost savings and efficiencies beyond belief. Traditionally, whenever a farmer would register an animal, it would take 30 minutes between taking the tag, tagging, and then going back and registering it on the system. I have to say we passed a landmark when we were able to tag, register, authenticate, and capture DNA in 58 seconds. So we're giving the farmer somewhere close to 29 minutes back per animal per day. And the blockchain is there to support the community, and that community is farm, processor, customs clearance agent, and retailer. And it really is transformational, Jeff, when you see how the collective power of this panel can augment new positive economic behaviors.
Excellent. Thank you, Kieran. Yep. MeiLin, I'm going to come back to you, please, on DNA tracing. So I know you're in the news all the time. You guys have had great growth in the textile industry and across multiple fiber types, even recently with your Pillar Technologies partnership. So congratulations on that. But how do you see your tracing integrating with other technologies, as like what Kieran has just talked about? We're sort of moving towards the topic of integration here of these different technologies. But how do you see your work combining and including things like the existing standards and certifications? So kind of the work that we do, whether it's the global recycle standard or whether it's the responsible wool standard. How do you kind of see those things coming together?
I think the key word is flexibility. You know, with everything going on with COVID, we empathize with the industry and want to make it as easy as possible for them to integrate our system and provide them the data that they need to make and sell their products, with integrity. So I think that what we would like to see is the complement of our platform with the information that we provide to support the standards. It has to be complementary. It has to be a collaborative process. Innovation doesn't happen without collaboration. We see that there are ways through blockchain and through other data, including Wendy's information, that can also provide good provenance to raw materials or other products made. So the key is to really be flexible, be open-minded, to be supportive of the industry, to help them. We have, for example, in recycled polyester, tagged material all the way from the pellet to the finished product. Not everyone knows that we have been doing that for 4 or 5 years now, commercially. And so we bring a lot of experience to supply chain. So it's not just, what technology should I use? But you've got to work smart and find the right technology partners that will hold your hand and help you with the integration and work with you on the standards that you're already using. We don't want to add more complexity. We don't want to add more process than there already is. What we want to do is provide valuable data that you can incorporate in your ERP systems, that you can then close the gap and get on with it,
Yeah, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about this a bit further on here shortly. So thank you, MeiLin. And Wendy, on the satellite work, I think this is super fascinating stuff. But could you describe in some detail, not excruciating, but how your satellite services actually work in practice with your paper, pulp, and palm oil clients, and sort of what is provided from an imagery standpoint? How often is it provided? How big is the geography, or how small can it get? And I think you mentioned it earlier, is there support on the ground with data gathering, and how is this packaged up in a digestible, informative way for your clients, right?
Okay, so I can just explain one of our customers who's actually in Indonesia. They are in the pulp and paper industry, and we have been monitoring for the last 3 years now, and we're going for another 5, about 3.8 million hectares over most of the Indonesian territory. Basically, we cover the area about once a month, and the satellite is collecting that data. It's downlinked to our processing facility, which is actually in Ottawa, Canada. And then we are basically generating forest alerts, which is basically a change detection type algorithm, but we're looking at very small changes so that you can, because some of these conservation areas are fairly small. In that process, it doesn't take long. We're basically then shipping those products via email, not via email, sorry, we're taking the data and directly ingesting it into their databases. And then from their databases, they then look at actionable things to go out and validate whether those alerts are important, or as you said, drones or whatever other forms of data collection that they actually need to do. I do want to give a shout out to them because we just know that they have just won an award for their sustainability, and in order to keep using these forest alert processes. And the other thing too is they've created a sustainability web portal, so all of their people that are buying from them can physically go on and they see all the information that they've been collecting. So they are basically showing that they are being as transparent as possible to their actual buyers.
Okay. And so the service can range, you could conceivably do a view at different points. So you could create, let's just say, the alerts at once a month, twice a month, every week. Are there variations in the time frames that you can use for a particular geography to create an alert?
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
the fact remains, it really depends on the industry and what you're looking at. And from a deforestation, if that's what we're looking at, I don't know that you need it once a week, right? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So again, it's looking at a cost-effective solution. What do you really need? And what level of resolution or what level of detail do you actually need to get to? So yes, you can do it as frequently as required or as less frequently as required,
Right.
depending on how you need the sustainability to work.
Yeah, just thinking across different applications for the industry, whether it's, ranch, say with sheep or cattle, or whether it's farm with cotton or other agricultural feedstocks for the industry, or the forest for largely man-made cellulosics and latex and sustainable biomass, et cetera. There are a number of different applications. So as you look across it, there could be different time frame needs for that imagery. I don't know. This is what's kind of fascinating. And then you get into, of course, not necessarily that you guys are, but into other remote sensing, whether it's in-ground sensors or robots that can be deployed, within on a ranch or on a farm or even within a factory, other facilities that kind of sort of piques the curiosity. Anyway, thank you for that. At this point, you guys, and thank you for your answers to those questions. And I know kind of what we're trying to get to is sort of how does this kind of look as a new system that incorporates all these different technologies that we've been talking about. So want to share a slide that Kieran, largely with Kieran's input, but also with Wendy and MeiLin, but specifically Kieran, addressing on the NSF Verify what the old way looked like and what the new way looked like. So if you can speak to this slide a little bit, and then we'll get into what it looks like for the textile industry.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. So from understanding the way the system works and getting into the fabric of the community, we spoke earlier about data silos. So data resides in multiple places with different actors across the supply chain. And whenever you're communicating separately. You may collaborate through email, which in today's society is quite inefficient in terms of response times and activity. But not only is it not efficient, it can actually have an impact not only on price but on product availability. And as one of the largest independent test, inspection and certification bodies, we looked at how this affected the farming sector. So in the UK, NSF is on 36,000 farms and deliver a number of audits right across the spectrum, from farm through food processing, through food delivery and food consumption in restaurants. And whenever someone needed to do a trace or had a query on a product, it took hours and it took days. So to provide this economic benefit, remove the risk, we built everything around the animal. And we built our queries around this thing that was designed as it's an asset, but through normal services, it's a floating asset. Whenever we digitized it and we used the geospatial data, it became a fixed asset, something that actually almost doubled in value in comparison to the old way. And the data around that animal was shared with its community members, processors, retailers, restaurateurs, distribution and haulage and customs clearance, so that one single source of the truth permeated the whole way through the supply chain. And it started with this thing called the Genesis block, but it started at the farmer. So the positive economic action for him inputting data in this space at this time permeated all the way up the entire supply chain to affect positive economic outcome all the way through. So if you apply the same to the textile industry, Jeff, we remove the barriers for adoption. This community environment, this blockchain, can then run services such as DNA, such as geospatial, You can audit in real time. So it's about creating efficiencies, removing risk, and taking the key learnings of building everything around an asset. That asset could be a sheep, it could be its flock, it could be components, it could be coffee, it could be anything. The same methodologies and the hardware that we have learned actually gives us the benefit to create knowledge transfer and share the benefits right across.
Okay, that's great. Let's move to the next slide, which tries to translate what Kieran's experience has been on the beef side into how it might look for the textile industry. And so all of you will understand the flow here as it moves through the system and asset. And I think that's a terrific way of thinking about this as an asset with attributes and attributes that accumulate at each phase of processing, each phase of production until ultimately it is delivered to the consumer. And so, Kieran, if you can speak to the icons and how this looks from fiber. In this particular case, we've got a sheep there for wool, but it wouldn't matter. It could be wood, it could be cotton, it could be recycled poly or nylon or recycled wool, whatever.
Sure.
So if you can speak to how that works in this system and the icons. Thank you. And Wendy and MeiLin, please chime in here too.
Great, Jeff, if we start with the end in mind. So the end product is something that the customer purchases, wears, consumes, but they have an interaction with that product. If we can tell the story behind the brand all the way down to its point of creation on the sheep, it was born in, it was reared in, its flock was processed by, you create an emotional bond between the consumer and the product. Now, in order to have 100% efficacy, data that's entered into the chain, as both Wendy and MeiLin have said, has to have validation. Whenever you validate that data, or someone makes a declaration that this product is born on my farm, that validation can be done by Wendy from her GeoSpatial data, but can also then be complemented by MeiLin's DNA analysis, and that becomes the genesis block, the block of trust. So whenever it goes from the source to the trader has all of the risk removed because this has had independent validation and verification from Wendy and MeiLin, but it also has a certificate of authenticity, a COA, because NSF has been able to take Wendy and MeiLin's validation and show that to the trader. So all of a sudden, there's a potential price benefit here to the farmer, creates better economic behavior, therefore he shares more information. Again, when it goes from the trader to the fabric, you have that trusted trader status, you're validating the data all the way. And as it goes from fabric, the tracer element that MeiLin can add, when a brand receives that to make it into a garment, they can actually validate their inbound goods risk-free, because they can actually in factory test that tracer that MeiLin has put in. And again, using that geospatial data and also the authenticity of Wendy's solution, you're compounding that and driving that up so that companies, whenever they make a statement, they can be 100% authentic, and their trust economy valuation is exponential, so that when the consumer gets it, the consumer knows, and whether it be millennial, whether it be Gen X, whether it be people my age, having the ability to know the story behind the brand is meaningful for me, it's meaningful for my children, and it's meaningful for society, because that can actually help expedite and promote that brand on the marketplace, whilst removing all the risk and dealing with the challenges that faces. And again, through the blockchain, the ability for NSF and the knowledge base that it has globally, Jeff, to validate that information and prove as an independent certification authority that all of the data and the products that are transcending this actually are 100% authentic. Now, there is a downside. For those that decide they want to be bad actors or misbehave or misrepresent a product in this supply chain, if you combine all of the panelists' efforts and services, we will, without a shadow of a doubt, shine a torch on bad behaviours. Those bad behaviours are no longer welcome in society, and they bring the entire sector down. So people who are making bad choices or bad decisions in that supply chain for economic benefit, this will impact them the most.
Thank you, MeiLin. Wendy, as you look at that, at this graphic, and you see the various aspects of it, your thoughts on how this could work? Anything to complement what Kieran has said?
I think it comes down to what Kieran was saying about trust. A lot of trust previously was really on the honor system, but clearly honor system doesn't work in all cases. And also companies that were doing the right thing were being outcompeted against with other companies that were reducing the cost of their materials because they were substituting a fiber, for example, to get the margin advantage. So, you know, those days are, and the gap is closing now because there are multiple variables, not just environmental, but social responsibility, and a lot of other factors that raise risk in the supply chain. So, for example, the current situation with Xinjiang cotton, how do you know that Xinjiang cotton, you know, will not get mixed with US cotton, for example, when it gets shipped to China in a mill? The brands don't know. In fact, all the auditing companies that are supposed to be helping audit in China are refusing to audit. So now you have no auditing in China. You've got legislation that is about to pass to the Senate, which may get approved, to basically put a ban on any Xinjiang cotton that could be in your supply chain. So I think that if I were a brand and if I was the CEO of the brand, I would be very concerned that the supply chain was had integrity and that there were absolutely zero risk of me being caught with any Xinjiang cotton in my supply chain. And so that's where data is important. That's why maybe having remote sensing technology to say, well, you know, if you say you're using cotton from this region, then let's take some satellite imagery to show that you're actually getting it from that region, right? Or in Kieran's case, you know, I want to know that yarn tested 100% for US cotton without Xinjiang cotton in it, then, you know, that bit of information is valuable. So all of those things together add to not just telling a marketing story, but telling an authentic story that is backed with science, with scientific facts.
Okay, great. Hey, Wendy, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that the increase in geographic kinds of information that are available, whether from satellites, from drones, from in situ, there's just an enormous amount of data that can feed in once you've kind of figured out what the issue is, and you can look at the different sources and the level of detail that's required. There's just a lot of technologies out there that are going to be able to feed things in that help that chain out, I believe.
Yeah, that's great. All right, you guys, I want to try to get some Q&A, but I'm going to lean on our marketing manager, Ryan. Ryan, I can't unfortunately see the questions with what I've got. I'm going to ask a question to the wrap-up question to the panelists, but if you could get those questions and begin asking them when we're done, would greatly appreciate it. Thank you. So, panelists, final question. So what advice, suggestions ideas do you have for our audience in helping them to better understand these technologies, what value they bring to their organizations and the system, and what kind of pragmatic, practical steps can they be taking or thinking about taking to advance it in some way? So, Kieran, why don't you start?
Okay, I guess taking that first simple step, listing the problems 1 to 10, where is the risk? Identify the risk first of all, and apply logic to that risk. And Jeff, I believe your team and the wider NSF team have that capability for assistance and consultation. Should the attendees on the call wish to seek advice. And certainly understanding the problem first of all and where the risk is, whether the risk it can be mitigated or reduced through the use of technology, whether it's a change of process, or whether, as MeiLin and Wendy have said, it's multi-factor authentication. Let's see and understand how we can help organizations take that first step. And it may not be a fit for all, but there are elements of our combined solutions that most definitely will add positive outcomes for those seeking to drive change within their organizations.
Great, thanks, Kieran. Wendy, any?
I think that relying on technology integrators or innovators, et cetera, to kind of look at those risks as Kieran was identifying and looking at what technologies physically exist that can fill in those risks. I think having to try to figure it out all on your own is rather daunting, and especially when things are growing exponentially all the time. But finding a good, solid partner to work with on the different risk elements, that's just a recommendation I would put forward.
Yeah. Thank you, MeiLin.
And I would echo the same thing as what Wendy and Kieran have said, you know, that it's finding the trusted partners that have the solutions that have been used over a long period of time. So, you know, we've been working in traceability, for example, in cotton for over a decade. If the issue of traceability and whether it's in recycled polyester or leather has the same principles. And the principle is, you know, want to make sure that that raw material that starts good actually ends up good at the end. Because
Right.
you start with good raw material, then the chances of ending up with good good products that will meet the consumer need is that much greater. So that, you know, I think that's where we would like to see more brands be willing to work with the supply chain, because it's not just about using technology, but it's actually about the brands and manufacturers working together to really want to make a difference.
Yeah. So cool. Thanks, you guys. I know this gets complicated, and just any individual technology and its role and implications and how it works and all that can be daunting enough. Just any one of yours you take a look at, I think blockchain is probably a really good one that way. Let alone how do you figure out putting those together? And I think any given brand, let's just say, to try to do that is challenging. But even if we think about it, this on an industry level, so a lot of things left to do. But I think back to kind of the point is we know there's a better system out there. I think it's pretty clear there's technologies like these out there that can work to help us make a better system. So one step at a time. Anyway, thank you. Ryan, have you been able to put together the questions if you can?
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
great. Yeah.
And
cool. I know we only have about 5 minutes, so fire away with questions, and appreciate you taking over on that.
Sure. And this discussion leads right into a question that we had from John. And I think you all touched on it a little, so you might not have too much more to add, but he asks, from your experience, who do you think is going to lead the integration and vision of this strategy? Is that going to be the brands, the manufacturers, industry groups, or some combination thereof. So anything you have to add on that point?
I do believe that it's better to ask questions and integrate openly as a collective. I think as we come as a collective, it's okay to share where the challenges are, because you can be guaranteed somebody else will have those challenges. And if we can work collectively on those, well then it really has a ripple effect where those positive change can impact right across the sector. It's about taking that first step and moving into a sphere of, it's okay, we have a few issues, and it may not be technology that could help, it may be just a process change, or it may be a validity or a data point that needs accuralized, but ask questions and fire as many as you can. As a collective, I think it's a great groundswell.
And I think there's a lot of early adopters out there, especially in the raw materials frame, that some who have already taken steps, so they may be very willing to kind of be a catalyst to help move things further along the chain. And I think talking to those early adopters is a great idea.
Yeah, I concur. I think that's a great idea to work with early adopters. I also think the standards groups like Textile Exchange could have a very positive impact to help streamline the use of technology and information. So I think it'll be realistically and practically a hybrid situation where a lot of these things are moving all at the same time. We also see there are certain brands that are key leaders in their industries, and they also can make some meaningful change through the adoption of DNA science and blockchain and other materials to help bring it together. So it's going to take a village, but acting is the key, right? Not talking, acting.
Wow, that's very powerful. It is a village mentality, and I think it's absolutely right. I echo everything that you've said. That's amazing.
Ryan, any further questions?
Yeah, we've got a number of other questions, and we may not have time to get to all of them, so we'll have to follow up with you afterwards, and we'll put out a Q&A perhaps, because I think the questions here and great insights we can gather from this panel. One final question that I think we can quickly touch on is, what do you think is the impact, this is from John and I'm paraphrasing here, but the impact of COVID on international cooperation and trade, and the impacts it's going to have on a sustainable supply chain, I guess for better or for worse?
I think one thing that's very clear, COVID has inspired so much innovation. I have no doubt that it has shone a light on inconsistencies and strain on supply chains. The one up, one down is no longer viable, and it's no longer sustainable. If any, I don't think there's not one country that's been hit by it, but certainly by UK standards, the impact of Brexit and of COVID has certainly helped us to work with remote bodies and remote organizations seeking to do exactly as we've spoken today. And this new necessity that's out there to move quickly is exacerbated by the challenges that are faced. So, John, I think it's a great question. And I think one thing this year has taught us is innovate, innovate, and innovate.
And I would say any CEO or COO out there, the top thing that's keeping them up at night is their supply chain secure? You know, it's all about supply chain now. COVID made that totally clear from the minute it happened. And because a lot of supply chain, it can be very fragmented, especially in the apparel industry where there are multiple tiers and multiple products that are used to make a product. The issue of secure supply chain affects everything. Every claim that you want to make, it all comes down to that.
All right, I know everybody, we're a hair past the top of the hour, and I'm sorry we didn't get to everybody's questions, but Ryan, I think what we can do is we can look at the questions, we'll direct them appropriately and get answers back to each of the questions. So again, bear with us. Sorry about that. I do want to finish up. It's always good to just quickly recap, and I hope today's webinar was informative, useful, at least help you think about a better way forward, which I think we all know is important. And again, as Kieran and everybody else said, coming out of COVID, the innovation that this has spawned. So, but hopefully you walk away today with a better understanding of these existing and emerging technologies and how and where they're being used, that you have a sense of how these various technologies can be married up in a way to significantly improve our textile certification, assurance, and traceability system. Probably less so there, but that's okay. I think there's just work ahead that we need to accomplish. And then probably most challenging is, what do you do? It's always good from these is say, what can I actually do? What's the call to action? So MeiLin, Wendy, and Kieran shared a few. I think from my standpoint is just sort of know that this stuff is out there, sort of think about how these things can be integrated into an improved system, and what can you do to become better informed, and ideas that you have. And everybody said it takes a village. It's a collaborative thing, and it is going to be a collaborative thing with brands, Textile Exchange, other technology providers, accreditation bodies, certification bodies. So just sort of keep yourself informed, keep advancing your knowledge and understanding, and ideally we've got so in the future, a little bit more systemized way of how to build this. So that is it. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in today. And I wish all of you a great rest of your day. And to Kieran, MeiLin, and Wendy, a particular thank you for sharing your knowledge and participating. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much. See you all soon.
Bye, everybody. Yep.